Early War's been getting some love in Western Australia lately. War Begins was a recent early war tournament using Flames of War version 3.5 rules. In this video I just want to have a quick look at my early war Australian 9th Division tournament list. We can look at the forces and the models, and have a think about what worked and what didn't. Early war isn't really a focus for me, but it's fun. There's nothing like seeing Italian cavalry and light tanks charging across a board, or witnessing a fight to the death between French motorbikes and Italian tankettes. The motorbikes won, by the way. My list is an Australian rifle company, so primarily infantry and guns. It does have 2 Matildas, which can be a handful for most opponents in early war. Because I don't really play early war, my list is a mix of my mid-war desert infantry and some older BEF stuff I managed to pick up years ago at my local hobby shop. The list choices were also constrained by what I had on hand and what I could buy in time. Early war stuff is increasingly hard to get. Battlefront may revisit early war, but it won't be any time soon. And miniature production is limited, with many early war resin and metal vehicles and infantry either out of stock or discontinued. While most of the miniatures in my list are base-coated, again, they aren't a priority, and a lot of it has been on the table a few times base-coated but unfinished. You'll get to see that when I go through the list in a minute. My Australian list is pretty defensive. It's primarily infantry and machine guns, backed up by towed guns and slow tanks. But during play I generally chose manoeuvre rather than defend. I didn't want my Matildas languishing in reserve all the time. Before we start looking at my specific list, I just wanted to mention how the rules for early war work. Early war hasn't been updated for version 4 yet. This means the current valid rule set is the version 4 early war and late war rulebook, but with forces built using version 3 lists. Commonly this is referred to as version 3.5 rules. It means that all the old early war version 3 books are still valid for list building, just some of the special rules are a bit modified or retired. With that said, let's look at my list in detail. It's an Australian Rifle Company list. You can see it here on the Legacy Flames of War version 3 Forces Builder. This service is still active and lets you experiment with and build version 3 forces. Just be aware that you'll need to do any version 3.5 rebates for redundant command and observer teams manually. My list is 1400 points, but that works out to just under the tournament points limit of 1375 after rebates. So my Australian infantry list consists of a HQ and 2 rifle platoons. Reconnaissance is handled by a single Commonwealth carrier platoon in the weapons platoon. Brigade support is some Vickers heavy machine guns. I like the firepower they bring to the table. But the big punch for early war is the Matilda tank platoon in divisional support. These are a lot of points, but are a handful for early war opponents to handle, unless the Germans bring 88s. The 2 2-pounder anti-tank guns are also divisional support. I'd have more of these, but I've only got the 2 guns. I have more on order. I'll talk about the reinforcements in another video. My final unit is the 18-pounder guns of a Field Artillery Battery Royal Artillery, crewed by Australians. I took the 5-point option to change the observer team transport to a universal carrier instead of a 1500-weight truck. That's the list I took to the tournament. You can see Forces lists them all out for you, but again a lot of the version 3 command teams and extra observer teams are redundant and you get a points rebate for them. Check out the redundant teams rebate table on page 1 of the early and late war version 4 lessons from the front. Of course there are no unit cards for these early war forces, but the forces list includes the arsenal entries for all the units in your force. You need to use these with the conversion tables in the new rulebook to field your units. These tell you what number value is associated with ratings like veteran or fearless troops. As I said before, early war miniatures are becoming hard to find. I would have taken more 2-pounders or even 2-pounder portees, but I couldn't find the miniatures. I would have explored taking Vickers Mark 6 light tanks in a divisional cavalry platoon, but again couldn't get any. Possibly some captured French R-35s would have been fun, or some Italian light tanks, but again availability of these is problematic. I've now got some Mark 6s on order, but the price of buying direct from Battlefront is diabolical, and the remaining stocks are limited. Plus I was keen to get the Matilda 2s on the table, and that's already a lot of points sunk into tanks. The key component of this list is the Australian infantry. Let's take a look at them. One of my rifle platoons consists of older metal figures, while the other is the later flexible plastic ones. The HQ is 2 stands, each of 3 figures mounted on small bases. These represent the company commander and the 2 IC. The company commander's base has plastic figures. These look okay painted up. That's about as good as they're going to look with my level of painting skill. This is the first rifle platoon. These are older metal figures. They've been at this level of painting finish for a couple of years now. The base coating is done, but the metal parts are just in grey primer and there's no washes done. One day I'll get them finished, but I only really paint things when I need to use them. So maybe the next mid-war or early war tournament will get me motivated to get them done. Maybe. No promises. Again, I won't win any prizes for painting, but they look okay on the table. These are just straight British infantry, but Desert Australians were dressed, equipped and organised much the same, so close enough. The platoon structure is a platoon HQ stand mounted on a small base. The HQ section also includes the boys' anti-tank rifle team and a light 2-inch mortar team, also both on small bases. The British do love their platoon-level light mortars. Then there's 3 rifle sections, each comprised of 2 rifle MG teams. That gives you a total of 6 rifle MG teams, each mounted as 4 figures on a medium base. Each section should have mainly riflemen with a single Bren light machine gun for each section. So that's 1 rifle MG team with just riflemen, and 1 with 3 riflemen and a Bren. That's a section. You can have an NCO or officer figure on either base. My second rifle platoon was a short platoon. That has the same HQ team but only 2 rifle sections, each of 2 rifle MG teams. I built the platoon like this for a tournament list a couple of years ago. At the time I really should have built the extra 2 rifle MG teams to make up the 3rd rifle section to field a full-strength platoon. But I didn't, so now I have 2 teams to paint and I have to try and remember the colours I used from years ago. More blasted knees to paint. This whole platoon is built using the mid-war flexible plastic figures from Battlefront. These were the very first infantry Battlefront released in this new plastic material, and it shows. They were still learning the limitations of the new material. Some of the weapons are just too thin and there's a lot of bendy guns. Some of the mould line cleanup was fun. But in the end they came together. I'm not saying there wasn't some swearing and cursing, but they got done. Again, these are British troops masquerading as Australians in the desert. I always take sticky bombs with my infantry, but every time I use them I lose at least 1 stand of infantry. This tournament was no exception. Sticky bombs are a very British invention. They consist of a glass sphere filled with nitroglycerin and coated with a very sticky adhesive. The idea is to walk up to a tank and smash the grenade on a surface like an engine deck and run away before the primer detonates the explosive. However, the adhesive can also stick to clothing, equipment or even skin. The results were often as not just as devastating to the infantry that attempted to employ them. On the table they give the infantry an improvised tank assault rating of 3, but rolling a 1 on the attack roll in an assault destroys the infantry unit instead. Next up, the force has a Commonwealth carrier platoon of 3 universal carriers. These nippy vehicles are the reconnaissance eyes and ears of my Australian force. Although their armour rating is 0 and they are open-topped, at least they have an armour rating. I've taken up the option of adding a boys' anti-tank rifle to one of the carriers. This gives it a bit of an armour punch, and an anti-tank rifle is not useless in early war. If we look at the arsenal entry, it has an anti-tank of 4 with a rate of fire 2. However, it is hull-mounted, so can only fire at targets fully in front of the carrier. The miniatures I used for the tournament were painted for my late war 11th Armoured Division force. I have some more carriers in the stash that I should paint for the desert, but these worked okay. I don't think I ever used the spearhead rule with these during the tournament, but thinking back I can see where it might have been useful. Next on the list is a Vickers heavy machine gun platoon. This is 2 sections of Vickers heavy machine guns for 4 teams in total in the platoon. Again, this has a command team for which I get a rebate. Plus I bought the optional 1500 weight trucks to transport them. another option I didn't get much use out of. In early war, the Vickers HMG is a good unit. With a rate of fire 6, you can roll a lot of dice. Unfortunately, they were charged by Italian cavalry while pinned down, and despite being fearless, just wouldn't rally. But they did sterling service against Russian infantry in the open. The Russians were forced to cross open ground in view of the Vickers and the 18-pounders. It did not end well for them. For the tournament I used my late war Vickers guns, but here you can see some mid-war guns I bought and are in the paint queue to match this desert force. Next up is the big stick, the Matilda 2s. I could only afford 2 of these as this comes out at 475 points. That's a big chunk of points. I usually don't like taking units with just 2 tanks. They're just too fragile under the version 4 morale rules. Happily in this case it wasn't an issue. In the first game they never came on table from reserves before I got swamped by cavalry and tankettes. No danger of morale problems there. The Russian T-35 tanks in the second game didn't stand a chance when I popped the Matildas from ambush. And in the final game the German player's 88 sighted on a hilltop killed both Matildas in the first turn, so again morale never came up as an issue. But joking aside, were the Matildas worth the points? They are slow, but their thick armour is a handful for many opponents in early war. But if you have to rumble into the attack with them against well-sighted 88s, that's a lot of points that just go away. I'd take them again, but the jury's still out. I do have some Mark 6 light tanks on the way. It might be worth experimenting with these instead. Still in divisional support, we come to the 2-pounder guns. Again, my list just had the 2 guns. That's a miniatures issue. I only own 2 guns. But I have more on the way. I bit the bullet and ordered some from Battlefront. These were 75 points for the 2 guns. They're always a strong workhorse and their AT of 7 in early war is pretty handy. It certainly poked holes in light tanks and tankettes pretty well. Their rate of fire is 3, so lots of dice to roll for hits. However, they have the no HE rule, so they're less effective against infantry or gun teams. But no HE is only a +1 to hit in version 4, so not actually useless. The turntable special rule is good, as these guns can spin and swivel around to engage targets anywhere. So I have 2 more 2-pounders coming to round out this platoon, and I ordered an extra pair because I managed to find some early war BEF Hotchkiss 25mm guns in a dark corner of my local hobby store. Apparently the Australians pressed these French guns into service in mixed platoons with 2-pounders. I can mix and match them into a second platoon of guns. I'm keen to see how this will work. The final unit in my force is a troop of ordnance quick-firing 18-pounder field guns. These reliable but First World War era artillery pieces are always a go-to in my British infantry lists. They worked okay and did some damage, but they're a big chunk of points at 255 points. 300 once I put the observer in a carrier instead of a truck. I did get a rebate for some command teams, but that's still a lot of points. These guns are standard equipment for Commonwealth infantry formations, but I've been asking myself if I should maybe replace them with some 3-inch mortars instead. I also didn't use them as effectively as I could have. I used them to bombard dug-in German infantry in my final tournament game, but I really should have been covering the tank and infantry advance with smoke instead. That way the Matildas might have survived to do some damage before the 88s got them. I still haven't quite figured out how to attack with my Australian infantry. Anyway, that's my current Australian list. It works okay as it is. I had 1 win, 1 draw and 1 loss at the War Begins tournament. That's usually about how I do. Would I make changes? Yeah, maybe. There are a lot of points sunk into slow tanks and medium artillery. Maybe more lighter tanks would help in attack. Possibly 3-inch mortars would be as effective as 18-pounders. But the key ingredient in the success of a list is less what units it fields than who's playing it. Despite being in the hobby for years, I'm not an experienced player. That's the one thing the Forces Builder can't really help with. So this list is fun to play and I always enjoy early war more than I think I will. Just a quick shout out to the event organiser Corey, and to all the other Western Australian players who are always so much fun. Corey, it's your fault I have an awful lot of stuff on order to bulk out this list for next time. There's the 25mm anti-tank guns as well as some 2-pounders, a blister of Australian infantry and slouch hats, plus I've bought a period correct Vickers HMG blister, and am thinking about mortars. On the tank front I managed to track down a blister of Mark 6s. Not desert ones, but the BEF set. They'll do. I'm planning to do a separate video about all these reinforcement units. Let me know in the comments if you'd be interested in seeing that. Bye for now.